I first noticed the flash drive wedged between the warped keys of my grandfather's old typewriter, its metal casing cold and slick under my fingertips. The room smelled of damp plaster and old paper, as though the walls themselves had gathered memories over decades. When I plugged it into my laptop, the screen flickered, bathing the dusty corners of the study in an unsteady glow. A single audio file appeared, night_broadcast.wav. My heart skipped when I pressed play. The silence that greeted me felt oppressive, as if inhaling the weight of forgotten hours. Then came the scratch of static, like distant rain against a tin roof, followed by a voice so faint I almost doubted it existed. A whisper, shaped by uncertainty, admitted, "I've been watching you." The words skimmed across my nerves, leaving gooseflesh in their wake. My pulse hammered in my ears, but a deeper curiosity held me still. I leaned closer, eyes tracing the wavering waveform on the screen. With each passing second, the static resolved into breaths, slow, deliberate, measured, echoing in stereo between my headphones. I tasted something metallic on my tongue, and the air turned unnaturally cold. Chills crawled across my skin, as if invisible hands traced my spine. The voice continued, softer now, a murmur threading memories I hadn't yet shared. "You moved the photograph last night." My fingers tightened on the edge of the desk, nails biting into wood. I hadn't moved any photographs. The unbearable quiet that followed pressed against my eardrums, until I almost convinced myself the recording had ended. Then a new sound emerged, the low creak of a floorboard, as though someone, something, had stepped just behind me. My breath caught. I could almost feel another presence occupying the shadows beyond the light of my laptop screen. The whisper returned, urgent and intimate. "Turn around." And in that moment, the static shattered into laughter so distant it felt like an echo from another life. I forced myself to breathe evenly, pressing pause on the recording as sweat beaded at my temples. The room felt thicker now, as if the walls had drawn closer, leaning in to listen. My fingers trembled when I reached for the typewriter's carriage, tracing the faded initials my grandfather had etched into the metal decades ago. The initials were almost worn away, like a secret he had once tried to scrub from memory. I stood and crossed to the ancient radio cabinet, its mahogany panels dulled by time. The lock gave way with a soft click under my tentative touch. Inside, dust motes danced in the amber glow of my desk lamp, settling on coils of old wire and a brittle leather-bound journal. The leather smell was sharp and bittersweet, like the ghost of some unspoken apology. I flipped it open. The pages crackled, releasing a whisper of ozone as though they too had been waiting for me. Notes scrawled in my grandfather's precise hand described experiments with late-night frequencies, attempts to tune into something beyond the usual static. He'd written of a threshold voice that haunted the airwaves just after midnight, urging him to listen to secrets that could not be unlearned. A tremor of dread washed over me, but beneath it lay something stronger, an obligation to continue what he had begun. My goal crystallized. I needed to trace the origin of that broadcast, to understand why it knew me so intimately. But as I turned the pages, I realized I was no longer a mere observer. I was his successor, bound to the same compulsion. Outside, the wind rasped against the window panes, carrying the taste of coming rain. The hairs on my arms rose as the room temperature plummeted, and I heard it again, a faint, rhythmic tapping behind the bookcase, as if someone was counting off seconds. I closed the journal, heart pounding. There was no turning back. I loaded the next track on the flash drive. Steeling myself for what came after, the voice said, "Turn around." I clicked play. The static surged, a living thing writhing in my headphones, and beneath it, almost inaudible, a pattern of taps matching the ones in the study. My breath caught in my throat. The whisper, now clearer, said, "You must find the transmitter." The words seemed to echo from every corner of the room. The threshold had been crossed. The night had woven its threads around me, pulling me deeper into a mystery that threatened to unravel everything I believed about reality. I shut the laptop with a snap and rose, determination mingling with fear. I would find that transmitter, and in doing so, I might lose myself entirely. The night air pressed cold against my skin as I slipped out of the study and across the hall, guided by the thin beam of my flashlight. Each step on the creaking floorboards sounded like a warning. The house was silent, except for the whisper of wind rattling the window panes. I paused at the door to the attic, where my grandfather had stored his odd inventions. The key turned with surprising ease, almost as if it had been waiting for me. Inside, the smell of damp wood and aged cloth hit me first, mingled with a faint trace of ozone that made the back of my throat tingle. My flashlight swept over crates of brittle paper, stacks of battered equipment, and at the far end, a rusted metal cabinet. That had to be it. I crossed the attic, boots crunching on debris, until I stood before the cabinet's padlock. My grandfather's handwriting was etched into the metal. Threshold transmitter. Do not activate. Below it, a single keyhole glinted in the beam. My heart thudded, but I couldn't turn away. I produced the small brass key I'd found taped inside the journal's back cover. It slid into the lock and turned with a reluctant click. The cabinet door opened on ancient hinges, revealing a tangle of copper wires, vacuum tubes, and a battered speaker grill that looked more like a mouth frozen in an eternal silent scream. Beneath it lay a laminated note. Midnight frequency, 7.21 megahertz. Listen with care. I set my laptop on a dusty crate and connected a coaxial cable from the transmitter's output to the headphone jack. My fingers trembled with anticipation. Outside, the wind had died completely. The world held its breath. I hit play on the recording. Static bloomed in my ears like an unseen storm. Then the transmitter whined to life, tubes inside glowing faintly orange, and the crackling coalesced into voices. They spoke in low, overlapping murmurs, layered like broken echoes. I could not make out words at first, but as I tuned the transmitter's dial ever so slightly, one voice broke through. Soft, intimate, impossibly familiar. It whispered my childhood name, one I hadn't heard in 20 years. A wave of nausea struck me. My mind flashed to half-forgotten memories. Laughter in a sunlit garden. My mother's lullaby swirling with dusk. The whispers grew more insistent. Remember. Come back. Find me. A sudden gust rattled the attic window, and the transmitter's hum surged, drowning out the whisper with a harsh, oscillating tone that felt like teeth grinding. I yanked off my headphones, heart racing so violently I feared it might burst. The attic was plunged into oppressive silence once more, but the temperature had dropped, each breath now visible as frost in front of me. The boxes and equipment around me seemed to lean in, shadows stretching long and thin against the walls. I realized with a sinking dread that I'd passed the point of no return. I could not simply walk away from this obsession. The voices had breached my defenses, dredging up memories I'd buried to protect myself. My grandfather's experiments were more than a curiosity. They were a conduit to something beyond every rational boundary I'd ever believed in. Shaking, I replaced the cabinet door, but the key slipped from my fingers and clattered onto the floor. When I bent to retrieve it, the beam of my flashlight caught on a photograph wedged between the wires. My mother, smiling, standing beneath a solitary oak tree. Only the tree looked wrong. Its branches were bare, though in every family photo it had been lush with leaves. A cold certainty settled in my gut. The transmitter had pulled me here to remember more than a voice. It wanted me to reclaim what I had lost, even if the cost was my very identity. I pocketed the photograph and climbed down from the attic ladder, transformed. I was no longer the skeptic who'd laughed at ghost stories. I was its next participant, bound to listen until the final secret was spoken into the static. A week later, I found myself drawn to the overgrown field behind my grandfather's house, where an old radio tower leaned like a broken sentinel against the night sky. The moon hung low, its pale light casting long, skeletal shadows across dew-soaked grass. Each blade was slick with moisture, cold and sharp against my bare hands as I pushed through the tangle. The air tasted of iron and soil, and beneath it, that familiar tang of ozone, as though the atmosphere itself were charged with anticipation. My flashlight's beam caught the tower's rusted legs, pitted with corrosion, and I shivered despite the heavy wool coat I wore. Nothing else made sense anymore. Only the voice on the transmitter, begging me to trace its source. I set the portable receiver at my feet and dialed to 7.21 megahertz. Static hissed like coiled steel. Then, unmistakably, the whisper rose, carried on the wind. Under the tower. I knelt, heart hammering, and brushed aside weeds to reveal a circular hatch set flush with the ground. The concrete rim was slick with moss, and when I wiped it clean, the metal cover groaned a protest, scraping against damp earth. Below, a scent of rot, and something sweeter, like old perfume, a memory I couldn't place. My breath trembled in quick, visible puffs as I pried the hatch open, lantern in one hand, the photograph of my mother clutched in the other. The ladder descended into inky darkness, each rung coated in slime and dust that shivered under my weight. I moved slowly, ears tuned for any sound beyond my own breath. At the bottom, the confined space expanded into a low-ceilinged chamber. Walls of cracked concrete absorbed the light, making the lantern's glow dance in irregular patterns. The air was thick, almost viscous. Each inhale tasted like stale water. At the center stood a makeshift console, vacuum tubes, analog dials, and wires snaking into the soil beneath the floorboards. The transmitter's heart. A tremor in my fingers guided me to a single red button smeared with something dark and crusted. Dried clay? I didn't pause. I pressed it. For a moment, nothing. Then the chamber shuddered, and the ground hummed. The static returned, louder, drowning out even my racing heartbeat. The whisper became a chorus, laced with words I had never heard yet felt in my bones. Remember me. Release me. Belong. The lantern flickered, plunging me into darkness broken only by the frantic glow of the console's tubes. A sudden gust, impossible down here, rattled the hatch overhead. The air grew frigid. My skin crawled with pins and needles as memories washed over me. Childhood laughter beneath the oak tree. My mother's lullaby echoing through twilight. And then the crack of thunder, the flash of lightning, the long silence that followed. Tears blurred my vision as the voices fused into a singular truth. The transmitter was not summoning something foreign. It was siphoning the fragments of my past, forging them into a gateway. I staggered back, panic uncoiling in my chest. The walls seemed to pulse, alive with energy. The smell of wet earth and ozone intensified, until I felt as though I stood beneath a storm sky rather than in a concrete crypt. My original purpose, to understand, was lost in a maelstrom of revelation. I realized then that there was no turning back. I had become part of the experiment. My memories, my identity, were the fuel. In that moment of clarity, I understood the true stakes. Retrieve the final message, or vanish into the static forever. My pulse steadied. I stepped forward, hand reaching for the microphone mounted on the console. The whisper beckoned, and I took a breath, ready to speak the words that might set us both free, or seal my fate. My voice trembled as I pressed my lips to the microphone, the metal cool and unforgiving against my skin. I hesitated, breath catching in my chest as the whisper rose to meet me, its cadence urging, "Speak." The air around me crackled, alive with energy that tasted of ozone and old tears. I closed my eyes and let the memories flood me. The warmth of my mother's hand as she tucked me in under that oak tree. The lullaby her voice carried through fading dusk. The hush that followed her absence. "I remember," I whispered, steadying my voice against the rising storm of emotion. "I remember you." Silence stretched, as if the world paused to heed my words. Then the console trembled, tubes glowing brighter, and the whisper returned, softer now, laced with relief. "You know me." The ground beneath the transmitter sighed, a low, sorrowful exhalation that vibrated through my bones. I felt the presence in that concrete chamber tilt toward me, not with malice, but with an aching need. The hatch rattled above, the night pressing in. I spoke again, voice firmer. "You are not lost. You are here." A current of warmth flickered across my skin, as though I had lit a candle in eternal darkness. The static warbled, then resolved into a single clear tone. My mother's humming, the tune of her lullaby. Each note shimmered through the wires, winding around my heart until tears slipped unheeded down my cheeks. In that moment, I understood the true nature of the threshold voice. It was not a threat, but a fragment of her essence, trapped between frequencies, longing for release. I could free her, or bind her forever in the crackling airwaves. My grandfather's warning echoed, consequences of forbidden knowledge. But the choice lay before me. I took a steadying breath, hands closing around the photograph I'd carried here. "Thank you," I said, voice breaking. Then, with deliberate calm, I pressed the red button again. The console's hum surged, tubes dimmed, and the chamber exhaled. The humming faded, replaced by a profound silence so vast it felt like a promise. I climbed the ladder and emerged beneath the radio tower, the moon a pale guardian overhead. The air was still, empty of static but alive with possibility. I slipped the photograph into my pocket and turned back toward the house. The taste of rain on the breeze. The loss I had carried all my life felt both sharper and strangely soothed, as if acknowledging memory had transformed it into something I could bear. I was not the same skeptic who had laughed at my grandfather's ramblings. I had listened, and in doing so, I had reclaimed a part of myself I never knew was missing. The transmitter lay silent now, its purpose fulfilled. Yet I sensed its power lingered, a whisper forever woven into the night. And as I walked into the darkened field, I realized that some secrets, once heard, become a part of your very soul.